Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Michael Woods, founder of Inclusive Sport Design, and welcome to the Sport is for Everybody podcast, where we talk all things inclusion in sport with amazing guests who are out there making it happen. We are, as usual, recording on beautiful Gundungurra country, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Gundungurra people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also want to pay my respects and welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all other Indigenous and First Nations peoples who are watching or listening in with us today. Now, if you're new to the podcast, welcome and thanks for being here. Please go ahead, hit subscribe so you'll be notified about all of our future episodes. If you've been following along with the previous episodes, give us a rating on whatever platform you're on. That all helps us to grow and get in front of more people. So if you're enjoying what you're hearing, give us a rating and let us know. So this is episode number 7. And today I am with Dr. Ryan Storr to learn how he has been influencing inclusion in sport through research and practice in Australia. Dr. Ryan Storr is a multidisciplinary researcher and consultant and is the founder and director of the Diversity Store, a Melbourne-based diversity and inclusion consultancy. His PhD explored how diversity is understood and enacted within organisational contexts and has led several large-scale research projects exploring LGBTIQ+ inclusion within sport and movement settings, and he's helped shape national and international policies and practices through that work. Ryan also successfully started LGBTQI+ sport charity Proud to Play and has raised over $1.5 million for LGBTQI+ sport causes through research grants and income. So in today's chat, we're going to hear Ryan's insights into what inclusion and diversity looks like inside organizations. Plus, we're going to chat about LGBTQI+ inclusion and hear about some of Ryan's groundbreaking work over the last few years. And also, we're going to shine a light on something that I think is a really important but often overlooked issue that's faced by particularly people with lived experience working in the inclusion field. So please stick around for that important conversation. And we're also going to chat to Ryan about his new venture and what he has on the horizon, which is super exciting for him. And of course, as always, we will get Ryan's top inclusion tip at the end. So make sure you hang around for that. Alrighty, let's get into it. Dr. Ryan Storr, welcome to the Sport is for Everybody podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. And just a little side note around number 7, that's my lucky number. So my date of birth is 7/7/87. Was born at 7:30 in the morning and weighed 7 pounds 7 ounce. So it's my lucky number. So
Where that's some like have you used that lucky number status in any lotto entries or anything like that?
I try. The only one, I don't really go to the casino much, but I don't mind a night out little here and there. And sometimes on the roulette, I'll put it on and it's got me a few little wins here and there. But yes.
Oh, well, there you go. Excellent. There you go. You learn something new about our guests every time we have someone on. So lucky number 7 for Ryan Storr. Love it. Ryan, before we get into the conversation, do you want to share and let us know what First Nations lands you're on?
Yep. So I am calling in from Naarm in Melbourne. So I would like to acknowledge traditional owners, which are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and 20 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders who are listening.
Wonderful. Thanks very much for that. Now, I'm just going to jump straight into it. We always like to get to know a little bit about the journey that our guests take in terms of how they ended up working in the diversity and inclusion space in sport. So what's been your journey into the work that you've been doing, and give some insights into maybe some of the things you're working on now.
Yes. So to start in terms of, so I played sport all my life. I'm a tennis player by trade and picked up a racket when I was 4 and then played ever since, but also did kind of everything. So I grew up in a small town called Whitby on the northeast coast of England. Did hockey, basketball, cross-country running, anything I could do, I would do. And then kind of became obsessed with sport, and then went to university, and I went to Loughborough University in the UK, which is a top, very large sport-based university. All the national governing bodies there, they win the kind of league, the university league every year. I think one year, I think it was the 2002 games. If Loughborough was a country, they would have came third, I think. So quite caliber. And was there and did a sport-based degree. Actually did human geography and sport and leisure management. So I did a double kind of degree, which kind of linked in my elements of diversity and inclusion and human geography and the sport element. And then I kind of went to Northumbria Uni on a graduate tutor position. So I did lecturing and teaching there, and then started my research. And I kind of fell into it. And I think one of the things that really kind of shaped my desire to work in this space, and especially around inclusion. So there's a large charity in the UK called the Youth Sports Trust. And they specifically promote sport and physical activity amongst young people, but especially the power of sport and how sport can be used for wider social outcomes, whether that be educational attainment, antisocial behaviour, all that type of thing. And I did a youth sport leadership camp when I was at university, and it really, really impacted me in the sense of seeing firsthand and working with young people what sport can do, and trying to empower young people to go out into their local communities and be the change that they wanted. And the camps that we did with the young people were very, very diverse. Like, so there was people with disabilities, culturally and linguistically diverse young people. It was just part and parcel, and that's how it was. So I guess from a very young age, in that degree, I was only 18, 19, grew up with diversity kind of around me and being front and center. And then it wasn't until I actually moved to Melbourne and started doing my PhD, which looked at diversity in community sport clubs, that I fell down a rabbit hole with LGBT issues. And look, I've been very, very lucky. Throughout my life and my sport engagement, I've never experienced any homophobia. I think on part, especially.
And I guess for context for our listeners, it's worth mentioning that Ryan, you are a gay man, and that's part of your life experience, and that's an important, part of your story as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was at uni actually. I kind of came out as well after university. But it was during that period that I kind of came to grips with the fact that I was gay. But I've been lucky that I haven't ever experienced homophobia, which I know is quite uncommon, in the sense of we know that around 75% of people who identify experience homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia. But I guess one of the things to consider is that I was always, and like I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but I was quite good at sport. So I was very fast, athletic. I used to always look at it in terms of like, people might not bully me or call me, etc., because they needed me to win. So I was always the best on the team, especially at school and leading up to university. I played hockey and tennis in particular, and was always kind of the best on the team. So I think people probably kind of there's no point really getting into him and bullying and things like that, because we need him to win. So I guess that is an element of it. If I wasn't as good, would that have played a part? So I definitely think that there is an element of athletic ability and talent that you can kind of almost hide behind in that respect.
Yeah.
And then, kind of, look, when I do education slides, I've recently started including Erin Brockovich slide. So I put a picture of Erin Brockovich because it was when I first saw that film, and it basically spoke to me in the sense of injustice and not being happy with that. And I guess some of the work and the motives that started me off on this, and the reason why I do it now, especially from an LGBT lens and being a gay man, is it's just not right. And it is an injustice, and that's what I don't like, which prompts me to do it. Yes, you want to see changes, etc., but it's the fact that it's not acceptable. And there's this acceptance sometimes. And even with LGBT inclusion, it's a very low bar for what sports organisations in particular are expected to kind of do. So at the minute, it's good that we're doing it, but doing one Pride game in 1 year as your only engagement for LGBT and really quite low bar.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of element for me.
I can relate. Yeah, I can relate to that desire to see justice. And I talk about it in terms of, like, for me, in my perspective, in terms of fairness and seeing that, you know, people like me have a particular general experience in sport, and it's not fair that people like me are the ones that get that, and oftentimes there are people not like me who don't get that, and for me that's unfair, and there's injustice in that, whether you're gay or whether you're a person with disability or whether you're from a different culture, you speak a different language, you look a bit different, whatever those factors might be, they shouldn't play into the fact that you should have the same right to play sport and enjoy it in the same way as people like me. Like that's the injustice that I see, and we have different experiences in that, but I can relate to that desire.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why at the minute with the trans debates and doing a lot around trans athlete policies, etc., a lot of the stuff around that, like for example, when they do a blanket ban, so people don't even have the opportunity or the right to submit an application or to ask to play. For me, it's a huge injustice. So that's one thing that's motivating me at the minute around that in particular. I believe that trans athletes should have a fair go and a right to be able to apply to play, even if, for example, they were proven to have unfair advantages, however you might look at that. But even the fact is they don't have the opportunity often to even try and play. So I think that's for me. Yeah.
And I know you've recently written on that topic, so we might drop some links in the show notes to some of your thoughts around that particular area, because we could start a conversation on trans participation in sport, and the podcast would be filled by the end of that conversation. But I think there's opportunity for more discourse on that, and we might touch base on that after this recording. But we'll drop some links in. I want to jump to thanks for sharing all of that, by the way. I appreciate it. I want to jump to your PhD and the work that you did as an academic, and kind of that work that you did in terms of looking at how inclusion and diversity work is actually understood and enacted in organisational context. So can you explain for our listeners a little bit about what that is and sort of what you discovered in that work?
Yeah. So with my PhD, it was a part of a large Australian Research Council funded project with my supervisors from ONS by Professor Karen Farquharson and Professor Ruth Jeans at Monash. And they looked at diversity and inclusion across all of Victoria, across a range of sports and clubs. So I did some work on that, but then my PhD specifically looked at one club. So I did ethnography, and I looked at and basically became a volunteer within a club for a year, a community cricket club. And I looked and researched what it meant for a community sport club and the volunteers to engage with diversity and inclusion on a day-to-day basis. So very much looked at what they understand by diversity. And I could see it's kind of not a funny story, but funny. People's understandings of what diversity and inclusion mean is very, very varied. And I remember having one informal chat with someone, and their idea of a diversity was putting when you have the barbecue, having a halal sausage. So, not saying that's wrong.
I mean, that's a practical, implementation of inclusive practice in a way.
It is, but I think for him that was it. No, nothing else.
That was it. Yeah.
So, it does mean different things to different people, but I guess I wanted to understand what it actually meant and what the day-to-day practices were of living and breathing it, and whether it was, because we know from previous research, it's often seen as a standalone and external and a kind of like an add-on or something that happens on a Sunday.
An add-on, yeah.
And then some of the things that I found, so I did a community cricket club, And they, during that year, decided to engage with disability as a form of diversity. And we had 2 all abilities teams join the club. And so I did a lot of work with the teams and the volunteers, and it was brilliant. I was very sad to leave. Some of the athletes with intellectual disabilities were like, they're all comedians. They're such a funny time. They would always hit the mick out of me and my English accent. And yeah, it was brilliant. I had such a fantastic time. And had a big impact on them. Like, one of the things that really stood out was how important it was for them on a weekly basis. And cricket 2 till 4, and on a Saturday or Sunday, the match was the highlight of their week. Like, if it wasn't there for them, it really impacted them. But I think from the club perspective, unfortunately, what I kind of found was, and this is similar to other clubs we worked with, they ultimately didn't see diverse inclusion as their work. They saw it as somebody else's work. So they had external volunteers come in to run their teams, and that's what they thought. And for example, me, that see me as an expert to help them, but they don't see it as their job. And that's the problem. We need diverse inclusion to be core business and everyone's business, and it needs to be done by the club. And that's one of the challenges around the idea of bringing diversity in externally, is that they think it's an external thing and they think it's other people's jobs. So unfortunately, I guess big picture stuff is, how do you change the mentality and understanding that the diversity inclusion is everybody's job and it's the club's job, it's not other people's, because ultimately, and it comes down to this conundrum, some sports clubs see themselves as there to serve the community. Some sports clubs are about sport and fielding teams and winning. And they see diversity as a nice inclusion kind of add-on, but it's not necessarily core business.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the main challenges around that.
Yeah. I can resonate with that. Over the years, the amount of times, you're talking to organizations, whether it's clubs or even, at an NSO level, right? Looking at inclusion and diversity work as only a program, and not thinking about it in terms of organizational cultural practice, and not thinking about it in terms of complete ownership. And I think one of the other things that I've seen over the years as well is that, and it speaks to your point around they see this club seeing inclusion as this sort of, we import the activity. We bring someone in to deliver it in our environment, but we don't own it. Speaks to this sort of, I guess, lack of understanding around the club's responsibility to serve and reflect the community that they're in and their perspectives of what their community actually looks like. And their lack of understanding, really, of what their community actually looks like. And I think part of the shifting that we need to see, especially at community level, is around clubs and deliverers and providers looking at things in terms of, do the people that are participating and paying our memberships and turning up on Saturday and Sunday reflect the broader community that we service? Do we look like the main street? Do we look like the people turning up at the libraries? Do we look like the kids in our schools? And if you do, then you're on the right track. And if you don't, then there's something to work on, right?
Yeah. And one kind of small addition to that, I would say, is that what I found was that when volunteers did want to actually do this and engage with diversity, and for example, a lot of the clubs at the time were basically being handed down diversity inclusion policies and strategies from the likes of Cricket Victoria and things like that, with no support. So often when the volunteers do actually want to do it and they want to engage with diversity and have inclusive practices, they don't know how. So there needs to be a lot more support available to volunteers who actually do want to do it, because it's not easy work sometimes and it can be quite challenging and complex. So just expecting it to happen is not going to work. Like, you need to support them. And especially I did cricket and I was absolutely gobsmacked around how committed the cricket volunteers were. Some of them were there 30 hours a week, like most weekends, most nights, on top of full-time jobs. So they're committed and they're dedicated. The time poor often, but they're still wanting to engage and do it. So we need to make it as easy as possible and support them as much as they can if they actually want to do this.
Yeah, that I've seen over the years. Clubs, they just want to be told what to do in a lot of senses, not in terms of do this, do it this way. When they want to engage with inclusion activity, they just want to be told, here's how you can do it. Here's the way, here's the steps, here's the tools, here's the examples. You can do this, instead of what they tend to get is some kind of compliance focused kind of assessment process and a policy, and then are expected to deliver outcomes in a practical sense. And that doesn't work for community clubs who are time poor, like you say, and volunteering their time and just are doing it on passion.
Yep.
They're not professionals a lot of times. So, was there anything else that your research really drew out that has kind of influenced the way that you kind of do the work today?
I guess the only other thing that was to come out of the broader project, which prompted me to start Proud to Play, was that when we were looking at different aspects of diversity, and especially vilification, there was a lot of it, unfortunately, especially in community sport. But whenever homophobia in particular, or any LGBT related issues came out, what I found was that nobody was speaking about it. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, no, there's plenty of homophobia, etc., but we're not going to talk about that. Or how has it been responded to? Look over there. Like that, it was just absolute silence. And then that's what started me off on the journey. I was like, well, surely there must be something going on, or there must be an organisation who is kind of doing this work, especially in Victoria. And there wasn't. So then that was like, right, let's try and set up a body to do this work and to actually support clubs and things like that, but to also be a voice for LGBT athletes. Because even if things were happening, or if someone experienced homophobia, kind of, where do you go? Who's advocating for them? So that then led me to do that, because there was just a silence around these issues.
Yeah. So for those who maybe aren't from Victoria or aren't from Australia listening or watching, do you want to just give a little brief headline intro to what Proud to Play is and sort of what sort of work they do? So
Proud to Play is the peak organisation for LGBTIQ plus sport and active recreation in Victoria. So it's a registered and identified body through Sport and Recreation Victoria, which is the government arm. And they do a range of things. So we do participation programs, policies, advocacy, governance, and trying to increase engagement in sport and active recreation, and a lot of very sport development related things. So we have a partnership with Nike Australia, and they support a leadership and coaching academy that we do. There's a range of things, and we do a lot of education as well. So we're kind of like the main organisation for LGBT sports. So if anybody needs any help, support, we have a lot of resources on our website that's accessible from anywhere. So have a look at the website and see what's kind of going on, and trying to get some movement and things happening.
Yeah, it's a wonderful organisation. I'll drop all the links in the show notes and point our listeners to some of the resources as well, which I've had the pleasure of collaborating with yourself and the organisation on a few things over the years, both kind of NSO work and outside of that as well. So definitely an organisation filling a much needed role in the sector and doing some really great work. So be sure to check that out. Good segue into talking about some of the LGBTQI plus work that you've done over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives and projects that you've been involved in, and kind of some of the impacts that they've had on national and even, I think, some of the work you've done has had some impact on a kind of international stage as well, right?
Yeah, so I think as well, because there is LGBT research out there, but there's not as much, I would probably argue, as other areas, especially around programs and evaluations and what's working around LGBT, etc. A lot of the research out there is around the prevalence and kind of nature of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. So we know that there's a lot out there, but I think sometimes evaluations are around programs and what works, all that type of stuff isn't as much, and especially from a policy perspective as well, and trans athletes. So some of the work I've done has been very industry driven to provide data and insights to sports and organizations to actually use it to improve or design policy programs and things like that. So it's always very specific with the intent of why I do it or work with certain sports to do projects. A couple of them, I'll give you an example. There's a indexing measure called the Pride in Sport Index here in Australia. There's a couple over the globe, like similar, and basically a sport organisation will submit an application around providing evidence of their LGBT inclusion policies, practices, programs, and they'll get a mark out of 100. What we found was that in order to do the Pride in Sport Index and other benchmarking things, you need to know what to do the work so you can then submit it. So what we found was that sports needed a bit of help and hand-holding process and a kind of, this is how you do the work to then be able to submit it and show that you're doing it. So it's kind of like a bit of a step backwards almost. Because remember, most of these organizations have never done or any engagement with LGBT inclusion at all. And so we designed what we call the Rainbow Roadmap program. And it was designed off some previous kind of programs around diverse inclusion, but specifically around some of the research projects I'd done over the years. And it's a 5-step program to take an organization from doing really nothing or not engaging to being rainbow ready. So, for example, we know that we can send participants to that sport knowing that they have engaged meaningfully with LGBT inclusion and that they'll be covered. So there's not going to be issues if they do experience homophobia, like where do they go and all that type of stuff. And we designed that, and then that was kind of a consultancy arm as well, because the other thing which is quite challenging for many not-for-profits and charities is you got to be sustainable and you have to earn money to do the work. Doing all the work that we do does cost money. We need salaries, programs, things like that. Hard to get. So we designed that, and that has been good, and we've taken various sports through that. And that, because ultimately there's different ways you can look at it. I'm very kind of big picture, trying to like transform the whole sports sector. So very at the large level. And one of the key things to make things move forward is that we need the sports sector to be inclusive. So we need all the organizations at that level to be inclusive and to do the work. And if that's not happening, it makes it very difficult, because you can have advocacy and people playing and doing things, but ultimately the sport organizations have the power to address the issues, to change the culture, and to make it inclusive. So we need each organization to be rainbow ready. And I think that's where the most work needs to be done, especially at the national sport levels, because I would argue that all the state sport organizations are outperforming and doing a lot more work than the national ones.
Yeah. And that presents the additional layer of challenge in the Australian sports system context, where we have a federated system predominantly. It's, some sports are shifting towards unitary models, but we have this conundrum of, some of our member organizations at the state and territory level might be more progressive and more active in this work than the so-called leading organizations in the national sport organizations as well, right? So that can create some challenge and blockage in terms of maximizing impact. So thanks for sharing that. I think from what you're saying, there's some great work going on, but there's still plenty of work to do. So what do you think that when it comes to LGBTQI plus inclusion in sports, why do you think continuing and driving that work's important, and what are the barriers, or what's the work that you think still needs to be done?
So I think generally the work that needs to be done is that sports need to do this work. If we were to get up a list of all the registered sports in Australia, there's a lot. There's not that many sports doing this work. You have like your leaders out there like Tennis Australia and people like that. But generally, it's always a very contained set of sports and organizations who are always doing the work. There's still many organizations out there who are not doing anything. and even some of the bigger ones as well. So I think we need to get more sports and states as well. Unfortunately, I spent 3.5 years in Sydney when I was working at Western Sydney University. I was trying to do the work. It was very hard. Didn't get any traction. Had meetings after meeting. Just a reluctance really to do the work. Ended up doing quite a fair bit of work with Sydney Sixers, but generally all the movement and things that are happening are in Victoria. So in all the other states and territories, there's not actually very much happening at all around LGBT inclusion. And for me, that's a disservice to LGBT people in those areas. So that's why I think that's important in that regard. I think one of the main things, there's a couple, but one of the main things that I find is that there is a reluctance to do the work, but when there is, people don't know how to do it, which is some of the work I'll probably come back to. But with my new consulting business, I find that people and organizations want that one-on-one support and want someone to sit down with them and hold their hand and show them how to do it and walk them through it and be there for like support and things. I think that they just need the help. So I think once we move past that barrier around the reluctance or cop some resistance and backlash and things like that, I think they just need that support because it's not there. And unless you do it, or you know LGBT people, or you have that lived experience, you might not have an idea about where to do it. So I think there does need to be more help and support available to these organizations to do it. And I think thinking about, because it's a tough climate at the minute, and I would argue that the resistance to this work is having it's having an impact and it's working, it's successful. There's strategies that are used to try and stop people doing this and to kind of go against LGBT inclusion, because it's a tough climate in the respect of people say it's a bit political, complex, don't want to say the wrong thing, and then it stops people from talking about it or doing it. So we need to move beyond that. And if you do something or say something and make an insensitive comment around trans athletes that you cancelled, you need to move beyond calling everything out and cancelling people and things like that, because I just don't think it's going to help anybody, and it's not going to help us as a sector move forwards to try and do this work. I get things wrong. I'm not perfect. I'm learning still. So I think we need to consider that and actually be a little bit more lenient and supportive in this kind of space. And that if someone does get it wrong, let's think about how we can do it. And I think there is a difference between malice and purposeful in people doing things. But if people tend to not know and things like that, I think we need to be a lot more lenient around that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. And yeah, the cultural climate around this audience of people, this group of people in the community in particular is it's a very I don't even know what the word is, but it's not a nice space to be in sometimes. Even when you have good intentions and you are trying to do the good work. So some of that resistance, I think, is maybe not justified, but you can understand it. So it presents a barrier on top of a barrier when you can't even convince people to start the work, the fear of what might happen, let alone start to address the barriers that actually exist for people in the LGBT community who want to get involved in sport. So it's a tough area, but that idea that particularly at the community level, at the grassroots level of sport, that having experts and partners and agencies available to hold your hand, provide that advice, give you the fallback and the safety net and support that you need, I think is so important. Which we'll get to in a moment. We'll talk about your new business and the work that you're planning to do there. But it also raises this other really important, I guess, question that we want to discuss today, which is around, I guess, the impacts of doing the work for people like yourself. And obviously, you've stepped away from working solely in sport. And that's been a conscious decision for you. You've made that choice to spend less time in the sports arena. And like I said, we're going to hear more about the work that you are doing shortly. But I want to ask about, I guess, the circumstances and the motivations for that choice and that shift in stepping away from the sports context. And what are the challenges there, and how have you navigated some of that? Because I think there's a really important conversation here about the burden, perhaps, the impacts on people with lived experience who work in the diversity and inclusion space.
I'll pose a quick question to you.
Yeah.
Do you know many out gay men working in sport?
No.
And I think that is the main thing. There is not many of us, and I think there's a reason for that. And the reason is it's a sector which is historically not very inclusive, especially towards women, and especially gay men in particular. And unfortunately, look, there's two sides to it. The people I work with, people like yourselves, and the sector who are doing this work are amazing. They're the best people you could ever meet. And I'm very, very fortunate around that. But the other side is when you're trying to do the work and make changes and going against the grain and working against 100 years of historical culture, which is indifferent or unsupportive of sexual minorities. It's not a very nice space to work in. And homophobia is quite common, especially in the work environment. And unfortunately, this is the state of it. I'm quite emotionally intelligent and kind of read the room in the sector. It just got to the point of, do I want to keep working in this industry as a gay man when it's not very nice? And that's it, unfortunately. And yes, there was that element of, I've had a lot of benefit. So I played sport all my life. I volunteered at the 2012 Olympics, doing the scoreboards at the volleyball, been all over. I've been to conferences. Sport has been very good to me. I've had a very good life from it, and I feel like I owe a lot to it. And that's why I've tried to give back where possible. But it gets to the point where, do you want to keep working in a sector that is actually often making a lot of attempts to not see you in that sector? So, for example, there's there's no AFL gay athletes who are out that we know about, for example. And generally, there's a lack of coaches, physiotherapists, everyone across the sports sector. And when they are, I know a couple, but it's very, very rare. And I just think it's maybe in 10 years, it might be different. But the other thing, I feel like I've got a lot to offer. Got a very large sport background, have a PhD in this. I feel like I could be a lot of use to many sports organisations. I wouldn't feel valued, and I wouldn't feel that me giving myself and my skills and expertise would be worth it. Like, I want to work with organisations and sectors who want to do the work. And unfortunately, sport doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't want to do the work. Some, yes, but generally. And over the years, I've heard lots of different things in private conversations, in research and things like that. But some examples, doing interviews from a research perspective where people basically very thinly veiled homophobia. Oh, I wouldn't want my child to be gay, the problems and blah, blah, blah. And I've had a lot to my face and got very good at it now. Just that kind of prejudice and homophobia that you have. So I think that was kind of my decision. And I know, like, I speak to women as well all the time, and there's so many people doing great work. I remember speaking to Kate Palmer, who was the CEO of Sport Australia and netball previously. And I know her, and I was chatting to her at an event. She was like, I've been doing this 20 or 30 years, and I'm still, like, we're still not getting where we need to be, and that's for women. So I think, God, where are we with like gay men in particular? So that's the thing. And I think the sports sector really needs to have a harder look at itself, especially around sport participation. It's let's say 10% of the population. If you're not engaging that, it's not good business sense. You're potentially losing a whole generation of young people from sport because you're not making good business decisions and you're not engaging and trying to be inclusive. And I think we're going to see sport participation probably going to go down. And I'll give you an example. Most of my friends, I'm 35, very few of my friends play sport. I play tennis still regularly. They all do F45, Barry's boot camp, body fit. They're all doing fitness and group and things like that. And they're not doing sports. And I think the fitness sector is doing a much better job of trying to engage diverse communities and speaking to those people. So I think, unfortunately, sport is not a welcoming place, especially for gay men. And even when I go to like networking events, sport events, conferences, I often feel out of place. And I think it just speaks to that culture. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And maybe in 10, 15 years, I might return to it. But at the minute, I think for my own mental health and just kind of satisfaction, I just want to work with people who actually want to do the work, because unfortunately, we're just not there. And it is honestly kicking and screaming. And it's just like dragging them to do something. And it's even the most basic stuff around like a policy or trying to address homophobia. And I don't think it's a big ask, but
or even just talk about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Absolutely.
To get people in a room and talk about it sometimes is just as hard as getting them to commit to a piece of work, whatever that might be. So thanks for sharing that. I think there's definitely more for the sports sector to do around having this particular discussion and not having it listening to those sorts of perspectives, because in the diversity work we talk about this the imperative of involving in bringing lived experience insights into the work that organizations are doing, whether that's through expert consultants like yourself, or it's through advisory groups, or it's other mechanisms of bringing that into the work, employing people from diverse backgrounds. But we often see them undervalued or not valued in terms of what they have to offer from an expertise perspective, but also just from a human value perspective. And that's a heavy weight for people to carry while they're also trying to, do their job like the rest of us, right? And I think that's a really important thing for organizations and leaders in particular to hear and to understand, and then to act on in their engagements with professional people and their professional work around diversity inclusion, so that we don't lose people like you to the sector because it's too hard. The environment's not safe enough, despite best efforts. And so I'm glad that we can have this conversation, shed a light on it. I know personally through my work and my business and the advisory work that I do with organizations, I need to ensure always and be better at providing space and safe spaces and opportunities for diverse lived experience input through the work, because obviously, I as a human represent the dominant majority in the sports sector. I don't have some of those experiences that are necessary. So it's something that I've got to work on as well through the work that I do. And that's one of the reasons for the podcast, is to provide platforms for these kinds of discussions. And it's something that I think all organizations need to do more work around. So I'm sure there'll be more conversations like these to come. But thank you for shedding some light on it. It's really important. So let's talk about what's coming next for you, because that's exciting and new, and you've got some great projects coming up, I'm sure. So tell us about the Diversity Storr, the new consultancy. What's that all about? How did it come about? And what's on the horizon?
Yeah, so I was I think tried to play. I was there for about 6 years. So most of it was voluntary. The last couple of years I was part-time paid employee. But previous stuff was always kind of voluntary. I felt like it had got to the point where Christine Granger is a CEO. She's doing a fantastic job. For me to kind of move on and let it flourish, and me to have that next adventure almost, and getting to the point where it was just quite challenging doing sport 24/7, because I still have a part-time contract at Swinburne where I do sport-based research around LGBT issues and other projects. But I started working with a couple of clients, and one thing that stood out to me was that they just need that help. But also often some of them, when they do LGBT work, they don't see it in terms of the larger picture of diversity inclusion. So I did some work with some and was asking them about where this sits in with their broader diversity inclusion strategy in their work related to gender equity, disability, etc. And some of them didn't have it, or some of them just weren't engaging in other areas, just like, we're just going to choose these two and things like that. Whereas I'm very much around, obviously, having done a PhD in broad diversity inclusion and did an element of disability within that, we need to look at it intersectionally and holistically, because often movements of oppression, for example, are very much similar, whether it was around racism and those movements in the US, etc. So we need to think about wider movements of oppression and how they kind of fit in, because especially with the nature of the work I've done, often I will meet and connect with people with multiple identities, whether that's LGBT people living with disabilities, LGBT people of color. So, and often, unfortunately, that's where they kind of get lost between the cracks, because they're not represented and they're not addressed, or then their needs aren't even considered. And we work along these 5 major boxes, but what if somebody goes across 2 boxes? Like, it's, oh, no, we can't do that. So very much more around that, like that bigger picture, and trying to work with different sectors outside sport. So sport has been good in respect of a lot of people like sport and the lessons of sport and what's worked, what hasn't worked. So very much trying to work with and target organizations who maybe haven't done anything or are on the start of their journey and need that support. Most big organizations have diverse inclusion in-house, and often, especially in the corporate sector, are doing pretty good work, but they might have a full team of people. So you would kind of expect that.
That's right. Yeah.
Whereas for some, they might not have any, or they might not have a team, or often it might be, I've worked with people who it's been distributed to just random parts of the business and they've never had any background or experience in it. And there's a lot of different sectors and organizations out there. So one thing I always think about, like, there is a lot of different industries out there. Some of them are maybe doing some stuff, but some of them aren't. Or it gets to the point where they may be doing LGBT work and they're having this resistance and things like that, and they just don't know how to deal with it. So they kind of need that kind of specialism. So my aim is to build it up and have different consultants and people doing different projects. My kind of bread and butter will be the LGBT element in particular, but also trying to work and help with that kind of broader strategy. And I see it very much as being the profit for purpose. So I've got some ideas about what I would like to do. I'd like to try and generate money and income and things like that and kind of put it back into communities. So one of the ideas that I want to try and do is around like a youth leadership academy. So trying to engage diverse young people and helping them, giving them opportunities to flourish, basically. Because I think often there's some fantastic young people out there, but for whatever reason, they don't have the opportunities or not given the right support. So very much around that, the youth element and trying to kind of give back and that profit for purpose type stuff.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it's going to fill a real need. And I pick up your point around the intersectional nature of identities and experiences, and that historically we have tried to, like you say, the big 5 boxes, treat them in silos and take, interventions and actions that look at one identity in its box and without consideration for other identities that they might also experience, and happens in sport as well. the programmatic and the strategic activity has been very siloed, and that's a symptom of a whole bunch of things. One, awareness and understanding of the work, but also the way that funding is structured and the way money flows for particular bits of work. They're often very much has been segmented in the past. That discourse is starting to change. But I think there's a huge opportunity to make a big impact by, as you say, working with the big picture and looking at intersectional factors and looking at how do you create environments of safety, inclusiveness, and belonging for everybody. And what does that work look like? What are those interventions in the workplace or in communities actually look like, rather than, what's a program for the LGBT community to be, more welcome in a workplace? I think there's a huge opportunity for that work. So I'm excited to see what comes from all of that for you. And we'll stay tuned, and we'll of course, share some information about how people can get in touch with you, as well. Going forward. So thanks for that. Now that brings us to the time of our conversation where we kind of do our fun quickfire questions, which we do with all of our guests. So are you ready to jump into those? All right, let's do the first one. The first one is, who's your favorite athlete at the moment?
Oh, the moment. Probably Carlos Alcaraz. So I'm a big tennis fan, and like his style of play, and think he's going to be a great ambassador for the sport and very humble.
Cool. All right, we'll try and find some stories about him and pop it in the show notes as well. What about a team? Favorite sports team?
Do you know what? I'm going to put it out there. I've just finished watching Welcome to Wrexham. Don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't seen it yet. No.
I just binged it and had like 15
list,
episodes last week. And have been following the social media, been watching videos. So I'm going to say right now, at this point in time, Wrexham FC from the UK.
Wrexham FC.
And my favourite team, and the whole backstory with Ryan Reynolds and stuff. Bit of a fairy tale type of thing. So
yeah, Wrexham FC. So for anyone who doesn't know this story, Wrexham FC is a third-tier Welsh club.
Now second tier.
That was bought by Ryan. Now they've just progressed. They were bought by Ryan Reynolds and his mate. And they pumped a heap of money into it, and now they've progressed up a division. They've got all these sponsors, the fan engagements through the roof. They're packing out their stay. It's a rags to riches story, and I think there's plenty more to come on that one. And they did a doco on it, and that's the show. So Wrexham FC, I love it. I can't wait to actually watch that.
You love it. So
myself.
Good.
It's gonna be good. So you're a tennis player. What's your greatest sporting achievement?
Oh, good question. Greatest sporting achievement. I got to I'll give you a tennis one. I got to, at the Australian Open, they have the Glam Slam, which is an LGBT tournament. And maybe a couple of years ago, I got to the final of the Open category with my partner, Sean. And we got to the final, but we didn't actually get to play the final, which we could have won, because Sean came down with food poisoning. But we made the final, and it was quite a few rounds beforehand and stuff. So we did well. So that's probably getting to the final of that is a good one, because we got
that's pretty good. That's
Australian
pretty good.
Open.
Yeah, wow, that's a pretty high bar. Well done. What's the first thing you do when you get up in the morning? I'm usually shown up by all of my guests with my morning routines. So what's yours?
Well, I have my phone in another room now, because I think I was listening to a podcast actually around putting it to bed and not engaging with it, so you don't watch and read it. So I think when I get up, I'll probably just go straight into the kitchen and make coffee. So I have one of those filter type things and put it on the stove and make a coffee, because unfortunately I never used to drink coffee until I moved to Australia, but obviously being in Melbourne is literally the best thing in the world. So yeah,
what else is there
without it now? So yeah, that's probably my main one.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, good for you removing the phone from the bedroom. I tried it, and I just it's made us.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Whatever. Oh dear. All right, last one, most important one, and you've shared so much with us already, but what is your best inclusion tip for our listeners that you can share?
Best inclusion tip is to have conversations with people of lived experience, or watch shows, listen to podcasts, read books to get an insight. You're not expected to know everything, and if you don't engage or have people of lived experience with friends, etc., you might not know. So I think opening your world to different perspectives through multiple ways and mediums is important, and working and checking with the communities that you're seeking to serve. I still see it a lot, lack of community engagement. So I think it's really important to have those diverse voices, check in with them, and work alongside them, that allyship aspect.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It's a really great piece of advice. Two tips actually in that one. Thank you very much. Educate yourself, broaden your understanding and experiences, and engage with the communities that you're looking to serve. Two really great tips there. Thanks for that. So in a moment we'll wrap things up. But before we get to the wrap up, I did just want to let all the listeners know, whether you're listening or watching on the YouTube, I want to let you know that there's a way that you can advance your inclusion impact and build your capability and confidence to take action on inclusion, and that's through the ISD Academy All Access Pass. This is a new offering that we have, which is essentially your access to our ISD Academy, which is Inclusive Sports Design's online learning platform. We've got a growing catalogue of practical courses and resources on all things inclusion in sport. And the ISD Academy All Access Pass is an annual subscription that gives you access to not only all the courses in the Academy, but you also get all of the guides that we produce at Inclusive Sport Design, plus templates and other resources all in one place. But you also get access to our online webinars as well, which are currently happening every month or so. That's included. Plus, and I think this is the best part of it, is you also get access to free office hours to book time to sit down with me and talk about anything to do with diversity and inclusion, or to help you with your courses. So you can book that time in and get a one-on-one session and help you, address any challenges, barriers, roadblocks, or issues that you might be having in the work that you're doing. So we've got a special offer for our podcast listeners. We've got a discount forever price on the annual subscription. So there'll be a link in the show notes. So if that's something that you think will help you in the work that you're doing, then I encourage you to check it out. And I thank you if you do. So that brings us to the end of our podcast. And Ryan's just ducked under his table there for a minute.
Just checking the internet's going off again.
He's making sure the Wi-Fi is still working. Thanks so much for being with us on Sport is for Everybody today, Ryan. How can our listeners get in touch with you and connect with you and find out about the work that you're doing?
You can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Dr Ryan Storr, or also check out the website, thediversitystore.com, for information, what's happening and things like that. But tend to be LinkedIn, probably a good place. Tend to post a fair bit there. So if anyone does want to connect or follow, please do so.
Definitely. We'll put all those links, etc. in the show notes. And for everybody listening and watching, make sure you head over to inclusivesportdesign.com for more resources to help you take action on inclusion. Plus, you can also join the ISD community and subscribe to the mailing list and get free inclusion tips weekly. And as usual, links, transcripts will be in the show notes. And make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you could take a moment to give our podcast a rating, that would be amazing, because it helps us get in front of more people so we can spread the message of inclusion far and wide. So Dr. Ryan Storr, that's it. Thank you so much for being with us, and thanks for making inclusion happen. I appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you.